Welcome into another edition of ACC Baseball Etc, presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Get ready for a new season of fishing fun with Academy Sports and Outdoors and reel in the best gear at low prices every day. Plus, Academy offers easy ways to shop and save time, like free 1 hour in-store or curbside pickup on academy.com orders. That's our friends at Academy Sports and Outdoors. This is going to be a speedier version of the show than usual. I'm Daron Vaught. Bradley Smart of ACC Extra fame is with me. Great stuff that he's pumping out there. So in case you are not a subscriber, go ahead and get that additional subscription in. As a reminder, if you subscribe to ACC Extra, you also get access to SEC Extra, or vice versa. If you're already subscribed to the SEC version, you can see Bradley's great work at ACC Extra. This is a weekend preview. So, Bradley, we're going to blast through the matchups, some more important than others by our estimation in the ACC this weekend. It's the final non-conference weekend before ACC conference play gets started a week from now. But first, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited for this weekend. A lot of good matchups ahead.
Let's start with, I feel like Gravy and I kind of glossed over a couple of teams earlier this week. And now that we've got 16 conference members, it's kind of hard to talk about, in depth about all 16 on a weekly basis. Clemson and Miami have huge non-conference rivalry series this weekend. Clemson against South Carolina. They're kind of doing what North Carolina and ECU did this past weekend with a neutral site and then a home and home. And then Miami and Florida, which is always a big matchup. Let's start with Clemson. Give me your temperature reading on Clemson and what your thoughts are headed into this weekend against the Gamecocks, who are, I think, good. It's funny, we're an ACC show, but the SEC angle is I think this is a big weekend for South Carolina in terms of proving what exactly they are.
Yeah, and I'm super excited for this weekend, especially because I'm going to be at all three games. Getting out of the bunker here after a lot of days of staring at 8 games at once. But yeah, so I'll be down there, and I think this is a huge series for both teams. Obviously, South Carolina, they're off to a 9-0 start. They're pitching it great. That's a really good weekend rotation. And then Clemson, they're finding ways to win. I think they've had some, ups and downs. There's been some questions in the early going, but at the end of the day, they're 7-1. Like they're getting the job done. They played 4 games last weekend. Won all 4. Then they hosted Winthrop and kind of found themselves in a game in the midweek and then decided, okay, let's put this to bed. Ended up winning 20-7. So I like this Clemson lineup a lot. And I don't think they've got their full potential yet, I would say. Like, if you look at some of the scores over the weekend, eked out, relatively 6-2 against VCU, 4-3 against VCU, 4-2 against North Carolina A&T. Those are pitching and defense and timely hitting winning you those games. And I think that's going to be really important against South Carolina. I think the biggest question, the Gamecocks pitching rotation has been really strong to start the year. And Clemson's got obviously Aiden Canuck and Ethan Darden. But I think the key to this series, if it could easily come down to a rubber match, is Justin Legurnick on Sunday. He had that tough start at Globe Life, comes back, goes, I think, 6 shutout in his second start. So what version of him we get is probably going to dictate how that rubber match potentially, if it's a rubber match, would go.
Yeah, and I think this is, if you're looking for positives for Clemson, it's been the starting pitching maybe hasn't been as consistently really good as maybe South Carolina's or what have you, but they've gotten really strong performances out of all 3 of their weekend starters, right? You mentioned Canuck, Darden has looked sharp, and then Legurnick looked really good in the instance of this past weekend. So I think it shows that the potential for all 3 to give you excellent starting pitching is there, which obviously is a huge asset when you think about going into conference play. That to me was a big win for them within the win over the weekend was Legurnick's strong start. And then obviously, like we know, they've got some depth in the bullpen, and it's just a team that this is kind of what Bakich has had or inserted since he's started his tenure there. It's just they do just find ways to win. It's not always dominant. It's not always pretty, but they're in the thick of it more often than not.
Yeah. And I mean, and an upside for Clemson, they're 7-1, and Cam Cannarella hasn't really gotten going yet. He's hitting, I think, 270. Luke Gaffney, highest profile hitter they were inserting into that lineup, I think he's hitting like 230. So their superstars aren't necessarily where they're probably going to be. Like, you don't bet against guys like that. So I think this could be a big, let's put together everything this weekend in a rivalry series. And if they do that, I think it's going to be a good weekend for them.
Yeah. Let's move to Miami. I still don't feel like I know a ton about Miami. I think it's a good mix of guys on the roster. I think it's going to work. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means it's a top third of the ACC or top half of the ACC team, but I do like their makeup. What's your gauge on them leading into this weekend?
Yeah, I think Miami's fascinating. I think you obviously knew going in so many new names, so many freshmen too, like transfers from all over the place, freshmen. And it was like, what is this going to look like? And it's looked pretty good. I mean, the Florida Atlantic loss, so they beat up on Niagara week 1. They sweep Princeton in a 4-game series second weekend. In between that, they lost to Florida Atlantic. But I think with them, the upside of that rotation and the bullpen too is huge. Like, if you look at Nick Robert, wasn't in the role that he needed to be in last year. He's not a closer. He's clearly a very good starting pitcher. He's off to a great start. Griffin Hughes looks fantastic. And then Brian Walters, I mean, the upside with Walters was always there. It's just the injury kind of kept him, relief role. They shut him down early last year. He looks nasty. I mean, 6 no-hit innings. And again, with this start, you have to say, okay, it's Princeton playing in the first weekend of the year. They get out of the gym, practice facilities. They come down to Florida and have to face a team that's starting to, get into stride. But still, like, he looks really sharp. And that's 3 guys. And then they're getting stuff from, Alex Drew and a couple other, pieces. And I think they can really pitch. I'm a little more worried about the offense just because the only 2 times they've really faced legitimate, like, velocity, it's been a little questionable. Like, Princeton has a guy who, is up to 97. He only gave up, I think he gave up 2 runs over 5 innings he gave up 1 home run. That was it. And Florida, who they have this weekend, is going to come at you with a lot of velocity. And so I think this will be a prove it weekend for Miami. And I think that lineup, there's a ton of guys in there that I really like and are off to really good starts. Jake Ogden, Bobby Marsh has 19 RBIs in 9 games. And so I think with Miami, this weekend will tell us a lot. It's not going to tell us what their whole season looks like, but it's going to say, can these guys rise to the moment in a rivalry series that last time I think there was a sweep in this was 2020. So, like, even when Miami's been down, they've won a game. And I think they've got a chance to do that again, potentially if those hitters are able to adjust, get going. It could be a really good series.
Yeah, I mean, Marsh's production with the 19 runs driven in is a wild number. Ogden has been great. Danny and I talked about him earlier this week. I love that they've got, despite all the changes, they've got a guy like Dorian Gonzalez Jr. still in the everyday lineup and still contributing as a holdover. You mentioned this about Cannarella at Clemson. Daniel Cuvée is hitting 321 with 1 home run. He's not even slugging 500. It feels like he's going to break out and burst at some point offensively. And that, I think, could be a huge catalyst for the lineup in a way that you're talking about. You're a little concerned about them. I've got I sort of went out in the preseason and planted my flag on Derek Williams, the Wichita State transfer. I saw him in the Jacksonville Classic last year and really liked him. And I think he's a good fit there at Miami. He's, below 300 on his batting average. He's having a nice start. He's not going to give a lot of pops, so no home runs yet, 5 driven in, but I think he's a solid player that could be a productive, maybe bottom of the rotation, bottom of the order guy for them. So I'm still holding out hope on the offense. And again, the starts by Ogden and Marsh are incredible. So maybe if they can keep that up, at least in somewhat, keep that up with the addition or the complement of Daniel Cuvée getting going. I think there's enough there. But I'm with you. I love the pitching. I think it's going to play in a big way this weekend and into ACC play. Griffin Hughes was one of the biggest pickups for an arm in the offseason, and he seems to be the real deal.
Yeah, and I think his obviously had a really good summer on the Cape, which is why a lot of people are like high on him coming in. It's always so satisfying to see when that translates, because you see all these summer numbers, and a lot of them they do, like hitters who didn't hit, they go to a summer league, get like 50 games, and then they're a new player in the spring. But seeing it with a pitcher is really nice too, and yeah, I've been really impressed with him so far.
Yeah, so that's Miami. They've got Florida this weekend. Those are, I would say, the two biggest series. Other games that I'm going to be mindful of for particular reasons. I mentioned I was in Jacksonville this past weekend at the Jax Classic. The only ranked team going into that tournament of the 4-team field was number 12 at the time, NC State. They were coming off of a midweek loss against Liberty. They went 0-3 in the tournament. They welcome Canisius this weekend. I'm actually going to be on the ACC Network Extra call for Sunday's Game 3, which for Wolfpack's sake, probably needs to be trying to wrap up a weekend sweep just to bounce back, right? I'm certain that that's the way internally they feel about it. I saw them in person over the weekend and gave my thoughts with Gravy earlier this week. Where's your head at with NC State? Is it hammer the panic button?
Yeah, I mean, baseball's funny. Like, you go back to the week, the game before the Jax Classic, NC State cruised past Fordham, ruled them twice, easy first weekend. They're late in the game against a tough Liberty team that's looked pretty good early. They're late in the game. They go to the bullpen. They bring in their All-American closer. And it's like the two paths. One path gets the job done. They go to Jax Classic. They're 4-0. They're feeling good. Maybe it doesn't go the way it does. The way it goes is Duden kind of implodes. His defense doesn't help him at all. They leave him out there. They don't have, Derek Smith still on the shelf. They don't have, another high leverage guy they'd already used. I think they'd already used Consiglio. So they leave him out there. They lose. They go to Jax Classic. Wheels fall off. They come home. They're feeling that pressure. Elliot Avon's talking about it after every game. It's like, we just need to hit. And, they lose to Richmond. 23 of the last 24 guys don't get a hit. And so, I think those 5 games, they're hitting 137 as a team. They've scored I don't know the exact number of runs, but it's very few.
Not many. So not many. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's easy to say, okay, let's panic. But I think it's really hard to bet against Elliot Avon. And even if, these guys are just off to really tough starts, I don't think it's necessarily a talent issue. I think the whole team right now is in a slump. Like, every guy that gets in the lineup, they're shuffling, they're moving people around. Everyone is not, they're just not hitting. And they're chasing more. I think year over year, it's obviously small sample size. I think 5% more chase rate, that's a sizable amount. And so they're just pressing at the plate. And I think, to your point, this is an incredibly important weekend to just say, okay, let's reset offensively going into ACC play. Because the last thing you want to do is say they, grind out 3 2-0 wins, or they don't score a lot of runs. The bats don't get going. That gets tough fast against the better quality pitching. So I wouldn't say I'm panicked. I think the talent's there. I think the pressing is definitely a concern, but I do think they'll be all right. It's just games pile up quickly. Elliot Avon likes to say that. They've lost 5 in a row. That's a long streak. They got to stop that skid, correct it, and get going towards ACC play.
Yeah, and with the short on-ramp, I mean, this is the sort of thing that there are cases where whatever the funkiness is does not get rectified prior to conference play starting. And then you're on roller skates going downhill until the end of the season. And I think of a team like Virginia Tech last year, and it just kind of snowballs. And next thing you know, it's midway through the season and you're totally out of contention. I'm not saying that is going to happen with NC State, but that's one of the scenarios that can happen. And I've talked to it with Gravy earlier in the week about it. I'm just, in my mind, I can't get past the differences between this transfer class and that transfer class. And you don't make excuses based on the guys who were here before you. But the fact of the matter is, last year's class, like incoming transfers at NC State, was just more built for immediate success. It was predicated on, okay, these guys are grad transfers. Alec Makarevich, Brandon Butterworth, Garrett Pennington, established guys coming from their previous schools who probably at this point in the season kind of know what to expect of themselves. And they've maybe had more cases of ups and downs as a player and know how to sort of buoy themselves until they can swing out of it as hitters. Whereas, for better or worse, the transfer class this year for the Wolfpack is a lot of sophomores and some juniors. And it's guys who are not quite as experienced at this level, yet have incredible upside. Like, I think no matter what happens for the remainder of this season for NC State, I think that they look like they're going to be pretty good next year too, based on the guys that they've had come in. These are not just 1-year rentals, I guess is my point. And they're, in addition to that, they're younger players, or as part of that, they're younger players who I guess are just like a little more susceptible to something like this. So I can see them getting a lot better as the season goes on, not because, they're basically at the floor right now. That's part of it, but also because it's that they have brought in the types of players who this is maybe around the time they're going to figure it out, or this season is the point at which, okay, they're going to figure it out and things are going to click offensively for a Justin DeCrisio in ways that they didn't at San Diego or what have you, right? Luke Nixon in his sophomore year is going to start to look like a different player than he was as a freshman at some point.
Yeah. And I think Alex Sosa is a kind of a good player to look at too, where it's like the expectations are incredibly high on him. But it's like, you have to make a jump. That's not easy to do. So, he's scuffling a bit. I think he's hitting 200, and it's just, he's not going to hit like that the whole year. I would be very surprised if he did. But when you're kind of leaning on guys to make a jump, and you're leaning on a bunch of, to an extent, unproven transfers, that's like the bulk of your lineup. Like, it's not a surprise that this is the start. And it's just, what does that look like in a month? Like, yeah, that's really the big question, which if it's like this in a few weeks, then yeah, definitely panic. But I think let's sort of let it play out, see if guys settle in. I think the biggest takeaway from the last few games is they have cleaned it up a bit defensively. They had a clean game against Richmond. Granted, they lost, but they played clean. No miscues in the field. So that's something to build on.
Yeah. Moving on to another team, I'm going to ask you if we're panicked yet. The Duke Blue Devils dropped consecutive midweek games to Liberty, who also beat NC State, as we mentioned, and Campbell, prior to heading into this weekend where they have Northwestern coming into town. Duke's down to number 17 in the country. I'll give you my quick thoughts on it from the lineup's perspective anyway. Ben Miller's not going to hit 200 for a season. AJ Grassi is not going to hit 200 for a season. But they got to hurry up and get at it, or I might be a little concerned about Duke. And that is well knowing that their early season schedule has been tougher, like significantly tougher than some of the other teams around the country that people are maybe a little alarmed about. Cincinnati's legit. That's whatever. That's fine. Beginning of the season, you're against another good team. I think that they're going to do some serious damage. Cincinnati is. Liberty looks like maybe they're going to be a pretty good team. Campbell, again, another one under a first-year head coach, which is traditionally a good team and a problematic midweek game for a lot of ACC teams. Looks like they're going to be all right without Justin Hare now that he's at Ohio State. So I do think the schedule has been competitive for Duke. But at some point, again, I'm thinking about like a Virginia Tech from last year. At some point, if the hits don't start coming for guys like Miller and Gracia, it can get a little sticky.
Yeah, no, I think that's all a pretty good way to describe it. I think it's just they're not playing Duke baseball. Like that's the biggest thing to me. I think they have 15 errors in 9 games. And this pitching staff, like there's a lot of upside there, but they're constantly extending innings with mistakes. And, the end result is they're digging a lot of their losses so far, they're digging early holes. Like they're just not showing up to start a game. And I think Chris Pollard's mentioned that a couple of times in, post games where we have to keep those extra runs off the board and we've got to stop, coming out of the gate slow. Cause like you look at the Campbell game, you look at Liberty, like they're kind of letting the other team, get ahead, build leads, sort of do whatever. And they just sort of implode. And, the Cornell loss was a lot of people have been like, oh my God, this is the end of the world for Duke. Cornell threw a guy who just carved 6 scoreless innings and Duke's pitching kind of did their thing. They fell apart a bit. And if you just cut out a few mistakes in those innings, instead of staring up at that like 10-0 deficit, it's closer and Duke just feasted on the bullpen. And so I'm not saying it's excusable they lost to Cornell, but I feel like what the next 2 days and even the end of that game, Duke's lineup looked more like we expect it to be. Punishing mistakes, good base running, doing all the things right. And then against Campbell and Liberty, you didn't really see that as much. And they couldn't cash in early, dug a hole against Campbell, dug a hole against Liberty. So I don't think I'm panicked. I am a little worried that the pitching is a lot of the guys are kind of regressing. I would say from where they were, like Andrew Healy starting on midweeks and he's not looked good in his 2 outings. And it just seems like there's a lot of guys that we have really high expectations for and they're kind of stumbling and they don't have that Charlie Bielenson escape valve anymore. And I think that's something they're trying to figure out. And so I'd give it some time, let the guys get into the right roles. I don't think the early results are obviously good. And I think they have a lot to work on defensively. But I again, kind of like Avent, it's hard to bet against Pollard. Like they can turn it on. They've done it multiple times in the past few years where they just get hot, things start clicking. So that's where I'm kind of at with Duke as well. Similar kind of vibe, I would say.
Yeah. And I'll just say that I don't know that there's a coaching staff elsewhere in the conference that I would feel better about coaching through this and turning it around than Chris Pollard and his staff, simply because we've seen it before, right? Like and we've seen productive play from a lot of the guys who are going to be the dudes for Duke in their careers. So there's a track record of sorts there. And typically the slow start at Duke, or traditionally, I guess, in the Pollard era, has come when they start their season playing at Durham Bulls Athletic Park, and then they would be kind of in the mix, but hadn't really broken out as a team. And then the Bulls start playing at their park. So Duke's back on campus at Coombs, and it's like, go figure. They start really playing well on the surface and the same field that they practice on, right? That's not the case now because they're at Coombs full time. But it doesn't change the fact that they've been through something like this before as a program multiple times. So I think I think they're going to be fine. I really do. And we circle back to NC State. Like, they'll turn it around to some degree. I don't know if they'll get back up to top 15 in the country or even, ranked, but like, they're going to be whatever version of fine I'm trying to circle and pinpoint in my head. Like, they're going to be fine. I think. I don't think it's going to be a catastrophic season for either of those two teams. But Duke, I've got a little bit more belief in, simply because there's more track record with their guys who are going to be tasked with turning this ship around.
Yeah. No, I think track record is a good way to separate those two in terms of confidence.
Yeah. College baseball fans, if you care about the tailgate as much as the game, Turtlebox is here to help. These outdoor-ready, waterproof Bluetooth speakers pack a loud punch with premium sound that's built to the drop and crush-proof, perfect for tailgates and those unpredictable weather days. As the official speaker of D1 Baseball, Turtlebox takes your tailgating experience from ordinary to epic, no matter where you are. Turtleboxaudio.com is where you can get your hands on the official speaker of D1 Baseball. All right, we got through, I think, the important ones. Bradley, what else interests you about this weekend slate?
Yeah. I think Virginia Tech, they've got East Carolina, Indiana State, and Kent State at the Keith LeClaire Classic, which is always fun, good quality baseball. I think that'll be pretty interesting to watch for the Hokies, who've kind of dealt with some injuries in the early going, but there's a lot of guys on that team I'm just really excited about, especially their freshman arms. So that's definitely one. And then I love how Wake Forest does these multi-team weekends to start the year. And I'm excited that Princeton pitcher I mentioned earlier, who kind of diced against Miami, he'll probably face them on Friday, Sean Episcope. And, I think that'd be a good one to watch for sure. And then Maryland, kind of a weird start for them. They're hitting a ton, but they also lost that series to Western Carolina, despite winning one of the games, putting up 35 runs. So
yeah, 35 runs in one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So don't want to give it them. But I think those two, obviously you get to see, I like seeing teams play multiple teams. It's kind of fun to get a regional feel. But I think those will be pretty good games to watch.
Yeah, I'm excited about those two. I've got the Friday Princeton Wake Forest game, and then Saturday Maryland Wake Forest. Alex Calarco has 6 home runs for Maryland, and Chris Hakopian is batting almost 550 with 3 home runs. He's slugging both of them slugging well over 1,000. Two of the hottest hitters in the country, and it's not arguable that Wake Forest is going to see. So as good as Wake Forest's pitching has been, I'm excited to kind of see those matchups. Saturday, it should be Matthew Dallas getting the start against the Terps. So sort of best on best in both cases of Hakopian and Calarco. So that'll be a lot of fun. I think that's going to be a good matchup, but something to get us revved up for the conference season starting next week.
Yeah, definitely. That's also a ballpark where the ball will fly if they get a hold of it.
Well, and it started to warm up a little bit. So, yes, I think that is safe to say. It's in danger of being a pretty heavy fly zone for those two and the Terps. So that'll be exciting. All right, that's all I got. We know there are other games going on. Sorry we didn't talk about your team. We promise we will next time, or the time after that, or the time after that. We get to everybody. Anyways, you know how this works if you've listened to the show. He's Bradley Smart. Be sure you're subscribed to ACC Extra. We're pretty sure he's a cyborg. He's been pumping out so much great stuff. So make sure you add that to your subscription. And remember, with ACC Extra, you also get access to SEC Extra, or vice versa. If you're a fan of an SEC team and you just are intrigued by what Bradley's doing over there, you have access as a result. So, Bradley, appreciate the time. Have fun on the road this weekend. First travel under the new brand here at D1 Baseball. Excited for you. And everybody enjoy the games. Danny and I will be back early next week, and we will talk about what happened.